In Redwood Falls, a town that looked gentle as the scent of pine at dawn, one 67-year-old woman discovered that the most dangerous person in your life is sometimes the one who smiles at you every morning. Margaret Lane had no idea that a strange perfume lingering in her son's car would unravel secrets capable of tearing a family apart and ignite a rebirth no one in this quiet mountain town ever saw coming. This is her quiet comeback. If this kind of story speaks to you, feel free to subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Now, let's begin. Margaret Lane had lived in Redwood Falls her entire life, long enough to know the rhythm of its seasons, the scents carried by its winds, and the way secrets tended to settle quietly beneath the pine needles. But nothing in her 67 years prepared her for how betrayal could hide inside something as small as a smell. A strange perfume, a fleeting trace, a whisper of unfamiliar sweetness, lingering where it didn't belong. She first noticed it on a late October afternoon, when the sun dipped behind the mountains earlier than usual, and the air carried that cool edge that hinted winter was peeking around the corner. Margaret had borrowed Thomas's car, something she rarely did, to pick up flour and holiday spices for the bakery. She opened the passenger door, placed her purse on the seat, and that's when it hit her. A scent she knew instantly didn't belong to Chloe. Sharp, floral, expensive. Nothing like the light vanilla Chloe always wore. She froze in place. Her hand gripped the edge of the door. The scent floated past her again, stronger this time, unmistakable. She inhaled slowly, almost unwillingly, feeling her chest tighten. "What on earth?" she whispered. Shock trickled through her, not the explosive kind, but the quiet kind that sinks deeper with every breath. Then she saw it, a small receipt tucked between the seat and console. She pulled it free. A hotel receipt. 50 miles from Redwood Falls. One room, 2 beverages charged to the room, a timestamp that matched the night Chloe claimed she was working late. Her pulse quickened, tightened around her mind, pulling her forward, urging her to look, to see, to accept what she feared she already knew. Back home, she placed the groceries on the counter and stared at the receipt like it might explain itself. She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to imagine her son being deceived, or worse, being part of something darker, something careless, something hurtful. Thomas had always been a good man, gentle, soft-spoken, a bit too trusting, maybe. And Chloe, well, Chloe had charm, beauty, and a voice that could sweeten any room. But charm could curdle, Margaret knew. Beauty could rot, and sweetness could hide poison. She exhaled slowly and walked to the front room, sinking into her favorite armchair. The sky outside deepened into shades of plum and navy. The streetlights flickered on. And still she sat there, feeling the weight of the perfume's phantom trace clinging to her senses. As the hours passed, she tried to shake it, tried to replace suspicion with reason. "Maybe it's nothing," she whispered into the dim room. "Maybe I'm imagining things." But the evidence sat on the table, ink drying silently on a hotel receipt that didn't lie. The next morning brought no clarity, only more unease. When Chloe stopped by to pick up a batch of scones for work, Margaret caught another whiff of the same perfume, barely there, but unmistakable. And yet, it wasn't on Chloe. It was on Thomas. Faint, but real. Her heart thudded, heavy and slow. She steadied her voice. "Thomas, honey, is everything all right with you two?" Thomas avoided her eyes, adjusting his jacket. "Yeah, Mom, just tired." The lie lived between his words. She heard it clearly, felt it, like the noose of truth drawing closer. He kissed her cheek. "I'll stop by later, okay?" "Of course," she said softly. When the door closed, Margaret gripped the counter to steady herself. She closed her eyes, drew in a breath, and made a choice she never thought she would have to make. She needed answers. Real ones. Not polite ones. Not softened ones. Just the truth. And she would find it, even if it shattered the world she'd built around her family. She began with quiet observations, glances, gestures, the sound of whispered conversations that stopped whenever she entered the room. Thomas seemed nervous lately. Chloe was strangely distracted. Their arguments, soft, tense, fractured, echoed faintly down the hallway whenever Margaret dropped off baked goods or stopped by after church. Days later came the next shock. On a chilly evening after closing the bakery, Margaret walked past Thomas's truck and spotted a pair of used coffee cups inside. Lipstick stains, the same deep rose shade Chloe never wore. Her stomach twisted sharply. Then the final blow of Act 1A, a small hotel keycard, slid partly under the passenger seat. She picked it up with trembling fingers. The same hotel on the receipt, sealing itself into her ribs. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Margaret didn't cry. She didn't call anyone, didn't confront anyone. She simply stood there in the cold, beneath the soft golden street lamp, and let the truth blaze across her chest like a silent wildfire. When she finally returned home, she made herself a cup of tea she couldn't bring herself to drink. She sat at the kitchen table until the steam faded, until her breath steadied, until she could think again. Her voice shook as she whispered into the quiet room. Whoever is still listening, stay with me. If you want stories where truth unravels slowly and lives twist in unexpected ways, tap like so more hearts can find their way to stories like this. She exhaled. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would search for more, look deeper, listen harder. The truth had begun whispering to her from a single scent, and she would follow it, no matter where it led. Margaret Lane moved through the next few days with a heaviness that clung to her like winter fog, cold, quiet, and impossible to shake. Redwood Falls, with its postcard charm and gentle mountain breeze, felt unchanged on the surface, but inside Margaret's chest something had begun to fracture. It wasn't the kind of break that came from anger. It came from something deeper, an ache that crept into the spaces between her breaths, the kind of ache only a mother could feel. She tried distracting herself with work at the bakery, mixing dough, kneading bread, frosting cinnamon rolls, but even the warm scent of sugar and yeast couldn't fill the hollow settling inside her. On Thursday evening, the house fell into its usual calm. Margaret brewed chamomile tea, wrapped herself in a knit shawl, and settled into her favorite armchair, hoping for a moment of peace. But peace refused to come. The perfume, the hotel receipt, the coffee cups, the key card, the way Thomas couldn't meet her eyes. Each detail echoed through her mind like footsteps in an empty hall. As the tea cooled, she heard voices outside, soft at first, then clearer. Thomas and Chloe were standing near the side of the house, close enough for their words to ride on the wind. Margaret didn't intend to listen. But one sentence froze her in place. Thomas, if you ruin this, we lose everything, Chloe hissed, her voice sharp and cold, so unlike the gentle tone she always used in front of Margaret. Thomas sighed. I know. I don't like lying to her. You think I enjoy it? Chloe snapped. But if she keeps running that bakery the old-fashioned way, Grant will never move forward with the project. And without him, we're stuck here forever. Margaret's skin prickled with disbelief. Grant? A project? Lies? Chloe's voice lowered, but carried enough for Margaret to hear every word. We need that bakery lot. Once Margaret signs the transfer paperwork, Grant can start development. You'll get your cut, I'll get mine, and then we can finally leave this stupid little town. The world tilted around Margaret. Her breath stuttered. And then Chloe delivered the blow that carved itself into Margaret's chest. She's old, Thomas. She'll believe anything you say. Just push a little harder. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, hit her with the force of a falling tree. Sharp, brutal, undeniable. Not just betrayal, but cruelty. She felt her heart crack. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, devastating tear. Thomas's voice trembled. Chloe, she's my mother. Chloe scoffed. And Grant is our future. You choose. Silence. Then Thomas whispered, barely audible. I choose you. Margaret's legs went weak. She gripped the wall to steady herself, tears spilling before she could stop them. She didn't gasp, didn't sob, didn't collapse to the floor. Instead, she felt the kind of heartbreak that aged her bones and hollowed her chest. A mother loves even when it hurts, but this was different. This was her son choosing to blind himself while Chloe sharpened the knife. She stepped back from the window slowly, afraid the sound of her pain might give her away. The tea on the table had gone cold. Outside, footsteps faded. The house fell silent again. But nothing inside Margaret felt silent. She pressed both hands against the counter, trying to breathe through the crushing weight settled under her ribs. Images flooded her mind. Thomas as a child, running into her arms after school. Thomas at 12, crying over his father's funeral. Thomas at 16, hugging her after winning a scholarship. She had raised him alone, fought for him, protected him. And now he was helping someone else hurt her. A mother's heart breaks differently than anyone else's. It breaks from the inside out. Margaret wiped her tears with trembling fingers and forced herself to sit. She needed clarity. She needed strength. But more than anything, she needed the truth, every last piece of it. The next morning, she moved through the bakery like a ghost. Customers greeted her with warm smiles, but Margaret barely managed a nod. Her hands worked automatically, scooping, folding, shaping dough, but her mind was miles away. Around noon, Thomas walked in. "Mom," he said softly. She didn't look up. "Hi, sweetheart." "Can we talk?" Her breath faltered, but she forced a calm nod. "Of course." Thomas stepped behind the counter, looking nervous. "You've seemed off lately. Did something happen?" She studied him for a long moment. His eyes looked tired, guilty, lost. Part of her wanted to scream, "Why are you doing this to me?" Another part wanted to hold him like she used to when he had nightmares as a boy. But she said neither. Instead, she whispered, "Thomas, is there something you want to tell me?" He stiffened. "What do you mean?" "Anything you think I should know." His jaw tightened. He looked away. "Mom, Chloe and I are under a lot of pressure, that's all." Pressure. The same word Chloe had used. Margaret's voice felt like breaking glass. "Do you love her?" Thomas hesitated. "Yes." "Does she love you?" she asked softly. A long, painful silence hung between them. Finally, Thomas rubbed his forehead, whispering, "Sometimes I think she loves what I can give her more than who I am." Margaret's heart clenched. "Oh, Thomas." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'll handle it, Mom. Don't worry." But Margaret did worry. She worried because she had heard the truth last night. She had heard Chloe's manipulation. She had heard Thomas's weakness. And she had heard the crack in her own heart loud enough to echo. That evening she sat alone in her kitchen, the weight of grief hanging heavy over her. She stared at the old recipe book her husband once teased her about. The book that built a bakery, he called it. She traced the worn edges, remembering every sacrifice she'd made to keep that bakery alive. And now her own daughter-in-law wanted to steal it. And her son was letting it happen. The emotional pain twisted deeper until she felt hollow. She stood slowly and whispered into the empty room. If you're still here walking through this heartbreak with me, take a moment to like this story so more people can find their way to these quiet moments where truth begins to crack open. She closed the recipe book. Her tears dried. Her breath steadied. Something inside her shifted, not healed, not hardened, but awakened. Tomorrow, she told herself, the real work would begin. She would stop hoping the truth wasn't real. She would start preparing for what came next. Because pain, once felt deeply enough, has a way of turning into purpose. And Margaret Lane was just beginning to feel that change. Margaret Lane had always trusted her instincts. They had carried her through raising a son alone, running a bakery for 3 decades, and surviving the kind of quiet heartbreaks that life hands out without warning. But the instincts she felt now, sharp, cold, undeniable, were different. They weren't whispers. They were alarms. And they were getting louder. The morning after overhearing Thomas and Chloe's conversation, Margaret woke before dawn. Usually, the early hours soothed her, wrapped her in the soft stillness of Redwood Falls. But this morning, the air around her felt tight, like the world was holding its breath. She brewed coffee, but it tasted sour. She tried kneading dough, but her hands trembled. She stepped outside for air, but even the crisp mountain breeze couldn't steady her. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The lies, the manipulation, the way Thomas had chosen Chloe over everything he had ever been raised to believe. But Margaret wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet. She needed more than suspicion. She needed certainty, solid, undeniable truth she could hold in her hands. And so she began to watch. It started gently, subtly. She wasn't spying, she was observing, paying attention, following the trail the universe had already begun laying out for her. And that trail led her straight into the turning point of her life. One afternoon, she stopped by the local diner for a late lunch. Janet, the waitress who'd known her for 30 years, leaned close as she poured coffee. "You all right, hun? You look pale." Margaret forced a smile. "Just tired." But Janet didn't buy it. "Well, if you're tired, you ought to avoid certain company." She nodded toward the parking lot. "Because some folks out there are trouble." Margaret turned, and her heart lurched. Chloe. Standing outside, with a man she had never seen before. He wasn't local. He didn't have that Redwood Falls ease in his posture, or that mountain-worn kindness in his smile. He was tall, sharply dressed, with a trimmed beard and cold confidence radiating off him like static electricity. It was Grant Willard. The businessman who'd been sniffing around the town for months, the man rumored to be buying up small properties, the developer who wanted to modernize Redwood Falls, code for replacing the town's charm with concrete and chain stores. But what stopped Margaret's breath was not Grant. It was the way Chloe touched his arm. Familiar, possessive, certain. Chloe laughed at something Grant said. He leaned closer, too close. Margaret felt her stomach twist painfully. This wasn't a casual meeting. This was intimacy. This was betrayal layered on betrayal, and suddenly everything snapped into focus. The perfume, the hotel receipt, the key card, the late nights, the lies, the pressure, the project, the manipulation. It wasn't just about Thomas. It wasn't just about the marriage. Chloe was using him, Grant was using her, and together they planned to use Margaret. Her breath hit sharply. She ducked behind the window, her hands gripping the edge of the booth. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She felt a burst of dizziness, grief, fury, disbelief tangling together. She had suspected deception. But this was an entire scheme unraveling right in front of her eyes. Her family wasn't just breaking apart. Her legacy was being targeted. Her life's work was in danger. And the people she loved most were being pulled like puppets into something dark. She closed her eyes, forcing her breath to steady. Then she reached for her purse, slapped cash onto the table, and hurried out the back door of the diner, moving like a woman with a fire building in her chest. She didn't confront Chloe, not yet. She followed her. For the next 3 days, Margaret shadowed Chloe and Grant with the quiet precision of someone who had spent her life noticing the small things, scents, gestures, nervous tics, emotional shifts. She followed them to the hotel where the receipt was printed. She spotted them at a realtor's office near the edge of town. She watched Grant hand Chloe a folder stuffed with documents. She saw Chloe kiss him in the parking lot. And with every observation, the truth grew sharper. Chloe never loved Thomas. Chloe loved power, and Grant promised her more of it than Redwood Falls had ever offered. The bakery, the land it sat on, was prime real estate for Grant's development project, and the only thing in their way was Margaret's signature. She returned home late that night, exhaustion weighing on her bones. She set the kettle on the stove, but halfway through pouring the water, she stopped. She didn't need tea. She needed evidence. Real evidence. She went to her desk, opened the drawers, and pulled out her old recording device, a small black gadget she once used to record recipes and supply orders during busy seasons. She turned it over in her hands. She knew what had to be done. On Saturday morning, she parked her car across from the hotel. She waited. Slow breaths, steady heartbeat, a plan forming with painful clarity. At 9:12 a.m., Chloe's car pulled into the lot. At 9:18, Grant arrived. They walked inside together. Margaret followed them quietly, staying just out of sight. She pressed the record button on the device and slipped it into her coat pocket. As she lingered near the hallway outside their meeting room, she heard them clearly. Chloe, so she'll sign it soon. Thomas thinks we're helping her with retirement paperwork. Grant, good. Once she signs, that lot is ours. Chloe, she's old. She trusts him completely. She won't check. Grant, make sure she doesn't. Chloe, I'll push him harder. He'll fold. He always does. Margaret's chest tightened, but she didn't let herself break. Not here. Not now. She held still until the conversation ended, then slipped out quietly, her breath trembling, but her resolve stronger than ever. She had what she needed. Proof. Undeniable truth. The turning point had arrived, and she felt it like a pulse through her veins. No one was going to save her. No one was going to protect her. No one was going to stop this but her. She stepped into the cold morning air, lifted her face to the pale winter sun, and whispered, "If you're still with me, following every crack in this story, feeling every truth unfold? Tap like so this story reaches more hearts that need to hear what strength can look like at 67. She closed her coat, held her head high, and walked to her car with a new fire in her steps. Because Margaret Lane was done collecting pieces. It was time to build her plan. And time was running out. Margaret Lane woke before sunrise on the Monday that would quietly change everything. She didn't know it yet, not fully, but something in her bones felt different. The kind of difference that hums beneath the skin, a low vibration that tells you the world is shifting even before your mind catches up. Redwood Falls lay under a thin veil of morning mist, the pines rising like silhouettes in a watercolor painting. Margaret stepped outside with a warm mug in hand and breathed in the cold air. The sting of it sharpened her focus, steadied her. She needed clarity now more than ever. Her heart might have been bruised, but her instincts were waking up stronger. She walked back inside, spread the collected documents across her kitchen table, and finally let herself look at the truth she'd been gathering piece by piece. The hotel receipt, the coffee cups with lipstick, the key card, the overheard conversations, the meeting between Chloe and Grant Willard, the whispered plans to take her bakery, her land, her legacy. Her hands trembled as she touched each item, but her breathing grew steady. She was done doubting. This was the moment when discovery transformed into understanding, when small clues connected into a single, undeniable picture. And in that realization, something inside her clicked, a soft but powerful shift. She wasn't powerless. She wasn't cornered. She wasn't alone. She was a woman with the truth, and that meant she held the advantage. She finally understood her enemy and their plan. Now she needed to choose her next move. Margaret's first step was subtle. She returned to the bakery, opened the front windows, and let the scent of caramelized butter roll into the street. Business was steady that morning, locals stopping by for apple turnovers and warm croissants. She greeted everyone with a gentle smile, the same smile she'd worn for decades. But behind it, her mind worked with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. Around noon, the doorbell chimed. Chloe stepped inside, a little too cheerful, a little too polished. "Morning, Margaret. I brought you the new forms from Thomas. Just some routine paperwork." Routine paperwork, the same phrase Chloe had whispered to Grant. Margaret didn't flinch. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Leave them on the counter, dear. I'll look at them later." Chloe's smile tightened. "It would be easier if you just signed now." Margaret met her eyes calmly. "I said later." Something flickered across Chloe's expression. Annoyance, panic, maybe both. She placed the forms down and left without buying anything. The door closed sharply behind her. Margaret exhaled slowly. They were getting nervous. Good. When predators grew anxious, they made mistakes. That afternoon, she drove toward the outskirts of Redwood Falls, following a tip she never expected. The town clerk had mentioned, almost in passing, that Grant Willard had been filing unusual zoning inquiries involving her bakery's land. For modern development, he had said, for the town's future. But Margaret knew what modern development meant. It meant gutting the town's heart. It meant erasing memories and replacing them with profit. She parked near the old trail behind the courthouse and walked toward the storage building where public documents were kept. The clerk trusted her enough to let her browse on her own. Inside, she opened drawer after drawer until she found the Willard file. When she lifted out the folder, a thick wad of papers slid into her hands. Blueprints, land acquisition forms, zoning adjustment requests, and projected earnings from demolishing existing lots. Her bakery was marked with a red X. Her breath hitched. Not only were they planning to take her land, they already had a development timeline in place. This wasn't speculation. This was execution. She realized she needed a counterplan, a real one that protected her bakery, her land, and maybe even the town. Margaret took photos of everything. Already her mind was racing ahead. Who could help her? Who would believe her? How do you fight a developer with deep pockets and a woman willing to betray her own family? But Margaret wasn't the same woman she had been a week ago. She had shifted, hardened, awakened. She walked out of the building with new purpose simmering beneath her ribs. The next morning, Margaret visited the only person she trusted without hesitation, Reverend Collins. He had known her since Thomas was a toddler, back when she worked double shifts at the bakery and brought leftover pies to church events. The Reverend welcomed her with a warm embrace. "Margaret, dear, you look troubled." "I'm more than troubled," she whispered. "I'm being targeted." She explained everything, carefully, calmly. When she finished, the Reverend sat back, folding his hands, the weight of her story pressing into the quiet room. "Do you have proof?" he asked. Margaret nodded. "Yes, more than they expect me to have." She handed him the printed documents. He read through them, his brows tightening. "This is serious," he murmured. "Grant and his company have been trying to get a foothold here for years. Everyone thought he gave up." "Because he couldn't get the land," Margaret said. "But now he sees an angle." "The bakery?" "Yes." Her voice cracked. The Reverend closed the folder gently. "Margaret, what do you want to do?" She looked at him, eyes steady. "I want to stop them." "And what do you need?" Margaret inhaled slowly. She had already asked herself this question. "I need community support. I need someone who knows town policy. And I need a moment, one opportunity, to reveal everything in a way no one can deny." The Reverend nodded. "You'll have it." Those 4 words felt like a beam of light breaking through the fog. As the days passed, Margaret began quietly preparing for the moment she would strike back. She collected statements, organized evidence, warned a few trusted neighbors that Grant's development plans threatened local homes and businesses. Her circle of support grew quietly. Retirees, teachers, farmers, small shop owners. Redwood Falls had been burned before by outside developers. They knew what was coming if no one stepped in. And they would not let their town be swallowed whole. Especially not by lies. Especially not by betrayal. Margaret began thinking strategically, arranging each piece like a chessboard. She needed 2 things. 1, a public moment that Grant couldn't control. 2, a place where Chloe could not manipulate Thomas into defending her. There was only one event that fit both perfectly. The Redwood Falls Festival of Lights. Once a year, the entire town gathered, under lanterns and music to celebrate the start of winter. The mayor spoke, awards were given, everyone watched. No one ignored the Festival of Lights. Margaret knew this was where the truth would finally break open. She wasn't rushing, she wasn't panicking, she was planning. Because she finally understood something powerful. The truth was no longer her burden. It was her weapon. And she intended to use it in front of everyone. And as she prepared to close the bakery that evening, she stood alone in the warm glow of the ovens and whispered into the quiet room, "Whoever's still with me, stay close. The real unraveling is coming." It wasn't a plea, it was a promise. Margaret locked the bakery door behind her with steady hands. The festival was only days away. And she was ready, more ready than she ever imagined she could be. Margaret Lane had known fear in her life. Fear of losing her husband, fear of raising a son alone, fear of watching dreams crumble under the weight of circumstance. But the fear she felt now was different. It wasn't sharp or frantic. It was cold, slow, heavy. The kind of fear that comes when you realize you're standing on the edge of something that will change everything. The Festival of Lights was only hours away, and Margaret knew tonight would not be gentle. By late afternoon, the town square buzzed with music and laughter. As families set out lanterns, children ran through streets with scarves trailing behind them, and the warm glow of winter lights painted Redwood Falls in shimmering gold. It was beautiful, achingly beautiful, and for a moment, Margaret wished things could have remained simple, quiet, safe. But secrets weren't meant to stay buried forever, and the darkest ones had already begun to claw their way to the surface. She stood inside her bakery, putting the final touches on trays of ginger cookies she'd promised for the festival table. Her hands moved with familiar rhythm, but her heart thudded with a silent drumbeat that wouldn't ease. She sensed something was about to go wrong, deeply wrong. As she tied the last ribbon on the cookie box, the bell above her bakery door chimed. She turned. It was Thomas. For one painful second, she almost didn't recognize him, not because his face had changed, but because his eyes had. They were hollow, restless, as if he'd been pacing the edge of a decision he couldn't make. "Mom," he said softly, stepping inside, "we need to talk." Margaret forced a small smile. "Of course, sweetheart." But her pulse skipped. Confrontations never arrived gently. Thomas shut the door behind him. "Chloe told me you've been acting strange lately. She said you're suspicious of her." Suspicious. The word cut like ice. "And are you?" he asked, searching her face. Margaret inhaled slowly. "I'm paying attention." Thomas stepped closer. "Mom, please don't start something. Chloe's under stress. We both are." "She's been lying, Thomas." He stiffened. About what? Margaret swallowed. She couldn't tell him everything. Not yet. Not before the truth was revealed publicly. Not when he was still wrapped in Chloe's influence. "About little things," Margaret said, "and little things add up." Thomas exhaled sharply. "Mom, she loves me. She's just trying to build a better future for us." Margaret's chest tightened. "A future that requires taking something from me?" For a moment, Thomas went silent. Then he whispered, "Mom, nothing's been decided. Just let us handle it." Us. The word hit her harder than any accusation could. They weren't a couple in trouble. They were a couple plotting something. Together. Against her. She felt the familiar ache push up into her throat. "Thomas, when did you stop trusting me?" He looked away. "It's not that." But it was exactly that. Before he could say more, Chloe appeared at the door, crisp and flawless in her winter coat. "Thomas," she said sharply, "we're late." Margaret watched the two of them, her son torn, Chloe cold as frost, and something inside her finally settled. The escalation had begun. There was no turning back now. By sunset, lanterns lit the streets and soft music filled the crisp winter air. Margaret carried her cookie boxes to the town square, moving through crowds of familiar faces, neighbors she'd baked for, families she'd comforted through losses, children she'd watched grow up. These people trusted her. They believed in her. And tonight they would finally understand what had been happening behind closed doors. She placed the cookies on the community table and scanned the crowd. Near the main stage, Grant Willard stood in a tailored coat, shaking hands with town officials as if he belonged there. Chloe hovered a few feet away, pretending she wasn't watching him. Margaret felt her stomach turn. She knew wolves when she saw them. They always smiled too easily. The mayor stepped onto the stage, tapping the microphone. Welcome, everyone, to the 42nd Annual Festival of Lights. Tonight, we honor tradition, community, and one very special woman, Margaret Lane, owner of Redwood Bakery for 30 wonderful years. Applause erupted, warm, genuine, thunderous. Margaret froze. This was it. The moment she had planned for, the moment she feared, the moment she needed. She walked toward the stage, her heart pounding harder with each step. She could feel eyes on her, friends, neighbors, even Thomas, watching her with confusion. But the one pair of eyes she felt most sharply belonged to Chloe. Her smile tightened, thin in warning, a silent threat. Margaret ignored her. She reached the stage. The mayor handed her the microphone. Margaret, we are honored to celebrate your... Thank you, Margaret said gently, cutting him off. Her voice carried across the crowd, soft but steady, a quiet fire beneath the words. I'm grateful for your kindness, for your support, for your trust. But tonight, I need to give something back. I need to give you the truth. A ripple passed through the crowd. Margaret lifted a small folder, the same folder she'd gathered so carefully over the past week. Over the last several months, someone has been trying to take my bakery, someone I welcomed into my home, someone I believed was family. Chloe's face blanched white. Margaret continued. Someone who planned to deceive not only me, but this entire town. Gasps broke out. Thomas stepped forward. Mom, what are you doing? Margaret didn't look at him. If she did, she might break. She opened the folder. This is the zoning plan Grant Willard submitted, marking my bakery for demolition. The crowd erupted in whispers. And this, she held up a printed transcript, is the recording I made of a meeting between Grant and my daughter-in-law, Chloe. A meeting where they talked about manipulating my son, about tricking me into signing over my land, about using Redwood Falls for their gain. Thomas staggered back as if struck. Grant's face drained of color. Chloe stumbled forward, her voice cracking. Margaret, you're twisting things. This is out of context. No, Margaret said quietly. For once, everything is in perfect context. She pressed a button on the small recorder. Chloe's voice filled the speakers. She's old, Thomas. She'll believe anything you say. Just push a little harder. The crowd fell silent. Air froze. Hearts stopped. Then Grant's voice played. Once she signs, that lot is ours. The silence shattered into angry shouts. People turned on Grant. Town officials demanded answers. Police stepped forward. And Thomas, poor Thomas, collapsed to his knees. Mom, I didn't know. Margaret's heart cracked, but she stayed strong. I know you didn't, sweetheart. Chloe's mask fell away completely, sharp, bitter, panicked. This town is pathetic anyway. You're all small. You're all... She didn't finish. The police escorted Grant away. Chloe tried to run, but a crowd blocked her path, furious and betrayed. Margaret closed the folder. Her hand steadied. Her heart quieted. The storm had passed. She stepped forward again, her voice trembling with strength. If you've stayed with me until this moment, If you followed my truth all the way to this light, please tap like so more people can find stories of courage from places like Redwood Falls. The crowd erupted, not in anger now, but in applause. Warm, powerful, transformative. Margaret stepped off the stage. Tonight, she hadn't just exposed a lie. She had reclaimed her life. The night after the Festival of Lights was quieter than any night Redwood Falls had experienced in years. Snow blanketed the sidewalks, muffling every sound, and the lanterns from the festival still flickered faintly in the distance. The town's heartbeat had changed. People whispered about what they'd seen, about Chloe, about Grant, about the betrayal unveiled in front of hundreds. But they also whispered about something else. They whispered about Margaret Lane. And Margaret, for the first time in a long while, felt the weight she'd carried slowly slipping away, like snow melting under morning sun. But the collapse of her old world, the emotional collapse she'd been bracing for, had only just begun. She awoke before dawn, not from fear, but from the strange stillness that settles after a storm. She sat at the edge of her bed, listening to the quiet hum of the heater, the distant rustle of pines, the soft ache in her chest that came from loving someone who had hurt her without meaning to. Thomas. Her son had not come home last night. After the confrontation at the festival, he'd stood frozen as if the truth had pinned him to the earth. His face, shattered, ashamed, disoriented, stayed with Margaret even in sleep. She held that image in her chest like a bruise. By mid-morning, a soft knock echoed through the house. Margaret opened the door to find Thomas standing on the porch, shoulders slumped, face swollen from crying, coat dusted with snow. He looked younger than he had in years, lost, afraid, and stripped of every illusion he'd been clinging to. "Mom," he whispered. And that single word carried every ounce of collapse, confrontation, and heartbreak tangled inside him. She stepped aside, letting him in. "Come sit, sweetheart." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd braided his hair when he was little, where he'd done homework, where she'd signed loan papers to save the bakery for the third time, where she'd celebrated his college acceptance. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Thomas broke the silence. "I didn't know. I didn't see it." His voice cracked. "How could I have been so blind?" Margaret reached across the table and took his trembling hand. "Because you loved her, and love makes us see what we hope for, not what is." He blinked hard, tears spilling. "She used me. She used us. I kept defending her. I pushed you away." He choked on the words. "Mom, I hurt you." Margaret squeezed his hand gently. "Yes, and you're hurting too." Thomas lowered his head. "I don't know who I am without her." "You'll find out," Margaret said softly, "and this time you won't lose yourself in the process." Silence settled again, but this silence felt like healing beginning to stretch. Thomas wiped his face. "What happens now?" Margaret released a slow breath. "Now, we rebuild." He nodded, looking down at his hands. "I want to help you, Mom, with everything, with the bakery, with whatever comes next." Her heart warmed. "Then we'll begin together." The collapse of Thomas's marriage had revealed something Margaret never expected, the chance for a new beginning between mother and son. The confrontation between truth and healing played out across Redwood Falls in the days that followed. People stopped by the bakery to thank Margaret for her courage. Customers increased. Neighbors brought food. Others offered to volunteer. But the moment that surprised her most came 3 days later, when the mayor visited the bakery during closing hours. "Margaret," he said, removing his hat respectfully, I don't think any of us realized how close this town came to being taken advantage of. Margaret smiled sadly. Most harm starts quietly. That's why we want to help you, he continued. The council wants to honor your 30 years of service and your bravery. We want to support whatever you build next. She hesitated. Whatever I build? He nodded. Something tells me you're not finished yet. And he was right. The idea had begun as a flicker, but now it glowed like a lantern in her mind, steady, warm, full of purpose. She didn't just want to rebuild the bakery. She wanted to rebuild lives. 2 weeks after the festival, Margaret hosted a small community meeting in the bakery. Only 30 chairs fit inside, but nearly 50 people came. Seniors, widows, retirees, young mothers, teenagers, and townsfolk who had been quietly harmed by financial scams or emotional manipulation. Margaret stepped forward. I stood on that stage because I wanted to protect my home, she said. But what I discovered afterward is that too many of us have been hurt quietly. Too many have been dismissed, cheated, or pressured. I don't want Redwood Falls to be a place where people suffer in silence. Heads nodded, some eyes glistened. So I want to build something new, Margaret continued, a foundation, a safe place, a resource center, a space where no one, no elder, no woman, no vulnerable person is left unprotected again. She paused. I want to call it the Falling Leaves Foundation, because even leaves, when they fall, nourish the earth they land on, and our falls, our heartbreaks, can nourish something better if we let them. The crowd erupted into applause. Some stood, some wept openly. Margaret felt tears rise in her own eyes, not from pain, but from witnessing the beginning of something beautiful, something bigger than her own story. Construction began within days. The mayor granted an unused town building. Volunteers painted walls, installed shelves, donated books, brought blankets, baked goods, office supplies. Lawyers offered pro bono support. Therapists volunteered weekly sessions. The bakery transformed too, opening evening classes to teach baking skills to teenagers and young adults seeking direction. Margaret found herself surrounded by flour, laughter, and new beginnings. One night, Thomas helped her close up. He turned off the last oven and leaned beside her against the counter. You know, he said softly, I finally feel like I'm part of something real. Margaret looked at him with gentle pride. You are. He nodded slowly. Thank you, Mom, for forgiving me, for not giving up on me. Margaret touched his cheek, her voice tender. That's what mothers do. We hold the line until our children find their way back. Outside, snow fell quietly, soft flakes drifting through the glow of street lamps, settling across the town like a blanket of renewal. Redwood Falls felt different now, lighter, safer, as if Margaret's courage had shaken loose the darkness hiding in its corners. And as she turned off the bakery lights, locking the door behind her, she realized something she hadn't felt in decades. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Rebuilding, restoring, reclaiming, and offering hope to those who needed it most. Before she left, she whispered to the empty street, as if speaking to every heart listening. If Margaret's story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to support more inspiring stories for mature audiences. Thanks for listening. Which part of the story touched you the deepest? Leave it in the comments and subscribe. We're listening. You're not alone. Your voice truly matters.